Hello, I'm Russ Etheridge, and in this video we're going to be doing a bit of an intro to joints and how to set up IK. Then I'll show you a super fast way of connecting splines to your joints so that you don't have to dig into the murky world of weighting. Weighting, if you don't already know, is, I suppose, the correct way of how you connect a mesh or like a character model to joints so that it bends and deforms correctly when you move the character's positions around. What I'll be showing you here is just a really fast way of getting something rendering. It's not going to be very flexible in terms of the way it looks, but the technique we'll use to do it is really useful for loads of other things. You can connect splines to nulls and anything else that you want to move independently of the spline. So it's a really useful thing to know anyway. And also at the end, I've included a quick time lapse of myself animating a walk cycle with this rig. This is the final bonus video that goes along with my rigging class on Skillshare. There's actually a couple of rigging classes now, one which is based around a full character where you go through the weighting. So if you do want to dig into the murky world of weighting, then maybe that's for you, so go and check it out there. There's also another one where I go into how to rig that character for riding a bike. So go and check it out, the links are in the description. Welcome back to Cinema 4D. So the first thing we're going to do is just make some joints and I'll quickly explain what they are. Then I'll go on to show you just some really super simple IK setup, how it works, and we'll be doing that on some characters' legs. So let's get to it. So we go up to the character menu up here and I'm going to select the joint tool. This lets you just kind of draw joints. You can't really do anything without holding down a button. It doesn't really do anything when you click, which is a bit counterintuitive. I don't really get why they've made it like that. But basically you have to hold down Control and then you can start drawing joints, or Command on a Mac. You can see just clicking randomly, it makes a whole chain of joints and they appear here in your object menu like this, all nested underneath each other. It creates an FK rig. I'm going to be explaining these terms quite a lot throughout this class, but FK and IK are kind of just two opposites of the same sort of setup. FK just means forward kinematics, regular parent hierarchy. So if I select any one of these going up the hierarchy, so if I select the first one, it will control all of them. And if I select one in the middle, it will control everything below that one. And if I can select the end, it will just control the end one. So FK, forward kinematics, it just works forward. IK, inverse kinematics, it works in the inverse way, so you grab the end ones and it will control everything above it. Things that are attached at both ends, when you push them closer together, the ones in the middle sort of like react. But yeah, I'll be explaining that as we go along. So I just wanted to quickly explain what a joint is, seeing we're going to be making so many joints. Excuse me if I occasionally refer to them as bones. That's what they used to be called. This bit in the middle is called is the bone, and the nodes here are actually the joints. Essentially, joints are they're kind of very similar to nulls, but they've got a few more they've got a few more bits and bobs going on. Nulls are a bit more general purpose. They're just used for absolutely everything as containers, whereas joints are really more specifically for making things animate, particularly characters. If I click on one of these joints, you can see in the attributes menu that there's actually lots more going on here than inside a null. If I click on this root at the top, you can see here that's just a regular null. It's just got a few options here. It's basically just display and position, and that's basically it. Whereas the joint has lots more properties. The main ones we're going to be using are in the object mode here. There's a few options here. This bone is kind of which way the bone is pointing. So if I select axis, it just points in wherever the axis is pointing. If I select to child, it points directly to the next joint, which is really the main reason you're going to be using it. From parent, it points to the parent, backed up to the parent. I don't know really why you'd be using this stuff, but obviously you can get pretty advanced with rigging and joints. Personally, I've never used these functions, but they're there. Then you can choose which axis along which the joint is pointing. So if I select axis here and then change it to X, yeah, it will point along its X-axis, and Y will point along the Y-axis. Pretty straightforward. This button is really useful. We'll be using this later. So when you click align, so for example, if I move this joint using the axis tool, so I click my axis tool, move this around, it moves inside the rig. It's not the children aren't following it because I've got the axis tool turned on. And then I go back into object, I switch this back to child, which is our default. Sorry, if I move this around, you'll see what I'm doing. It will change the direction, but you can see here the axes aren't moving. axes aren't updating to where to where the bone is pointing. And you can fix that by clicking this button here, align, and that will realign your axes to point along the bone, which is what we'll be getting into later. Once you start rigging and you need to adjust the rig, you'll need to move joints around like this to get them placed better. And then once you've done that, you have to click align to make sure that your axes are aligned. Otherwise, you'll get some really funny rotation going on in these joints and they won't really work properly. And the last one is length. So you can actually change the distance to the child using this. This is also really useful for when you're adjusting your rig. You can change the length of the legs if you need to adjust your model, if you need to adjust the characters. You can do that from inside the joint. You don't have to grab the child and move it. So that's a really useful bit of functionality inside joints as well. I'm just going to get rid of that for the moment and we're going to make a leg. So to do that, I'm going to switch to my side view. Characters should be made with their backs pointing along the Z-axis. That's kind of like the standard way to make any object in Cinema 4D. Like your front view is here, it's all set up so Y is vertical, X is horizontal, and Z is going off into the distance. So I would definitely recommend building any object, including characters, with the Z-axis as the character's back, if that makes sense. So I'm going to grab my joint tool again, I'm going to switch to the right view, and I'm just going to hold down Control, and I'm going to start at the top where the hip is, and we want to work downwards towards the toe. So I'm going to draw a hip joint, and so click where the hip is, and then I'm going to click where I want my knee, roughly there, and then I'm going to click where I want my ankle, which will kind of just be there, and I'm going to click for the tip of the toe, roughly there. Okay, I'd like to briefly step in here and try and explain to camera first what the difference between IK and FK is, so that when we start talking about them, you kind of have a bit more of a clear idea, hopefully. FK, or forward kinematics, is basically the default hierarchy when you attach one object to the other. So in Cinema 4D, when you have one object and then you have another object in the object hierarchy tree, that object follows the one above it, and then you have another one, and that one follows the one above that one, and so on and so on and so on down the chain. And FK just means forward kinematics. Is a complicated name for just one thing following the next thing, following the next thing in a very intuitive way. IK, or inverse kinematics, on the other hand, is a little bit more complicated and requires a few more steps to set up in Cinema 4D. Probably the best way to explain it is to actually see it in action. When you have the hip and the foot in FK, in forward kinematics, so that's just the default way that it comes out when we've built the leg. When you move the hip, the whole leg moves. When you move the knee, the foot and the shin move, and when you move the ankle, the foot moves. Inverse kinematics will be set up so that we have the hip at one end and the foot at the other end. Maybe not like this, maybe like this. What it allows you to do is move the hip and the foot stays still. So you can move the hip wherever you want and the foot will stay locked in its position, and the knee moves accordingly. So everything in between the two ends of an IK chain will be independently controllable. You move the foot wherever you want and the hip will stay in the same position. Imagine you moved the foot in an FK rig. The knee would just be staying in the same place and the foot will just be moving around, and that shin will be changing length. But like I said, it makes a lot of sense when you actually see it in action, and it takes a few steps to set up. So let's do that now. Okay, so what we need to do is we want an IK chain, but we want it from the ankle. If you could create an IK chain for the entire length of this, but it's going to be much better to have IK just for the knee and then having more or less an FK control for the foot. That way you have full control over the foot rotation, and when you lift the ankle up and down, the knee will bend. So to do that, we need to click on our joint 2. Actually, let's go through and name these because it's going to be a bit easier. Let's start with the right leg, so I'm going to call this R hip. Let's keep joint, otherwise it'll get a bit confusing once you start modelling. And then I'll click on this one, and I'm going to call it R knee joint. And this one will be R ankle, R toe joint. Now that we've named all of these, what we're going to do is click on the ankle and then hold shift and click on root. That will select obviously everything from the ankle to the top where the hip is, and then we're going to click on character and we're going to click on create IK chain. What that's created is an IK tag. So there's a few options in here. I won't go into loads of detail in here right now. Most of it's pretty much automatic. You don't really need to do much, but we'll have a look at that in a sec. And the other thing it's created is a null, which is the target for the end of the IK chain. So if you grab that now, press your move control or E and move your ankle around, you can see now we've got some lovely IK action on the knee. So there we go. There's a couple of problems that we need to sort out, and one of them being if you lift your ankle up like this, the toe points down in the direction sort of keeping in line with the shin, so we need to sort that out. And the other thing is, this is actually a 3D animation, so at the moment we've got no control over which direction the knee points. So let's do that first because that's relatively easy. So we're going to click on the IK tag and you click add pole, and what that does is it gives you an extra null in the object manager. The knee now uses that pole as a target. So if I drag this around, put it in front of the leg, you can see somewhere around here, you can see the knee now points at it. And if I go to the 3D view, I move the x-axis, the knee follows that around. The next thing I'm going to do is select the IK joint goal, which is our ankle control, and I'm going to change the look of it. Because it's just a null, it just appears in the object manager as a dot. And actually we kind of want that to be a bit more visible, a bit more easy to select. And the way we do that is you click on the null and then you go to object in the null attributes and change this to, let's go with a cube down here, and it defaults to being pretty small and it orientates to the camera, so it looks like a square, but actually it's a cube. It's just, you're just looking at it straight on. So if you change that to any one of these XY, that's fine. It's good. And the other thing that's really handy as well, which I'll show you, is to change the display color. So if we switch in the basic tab up here, if you go to on the display color and then pick any color, the other thing you can do also is change the icon in the object manager. So if you swivel down this little triangle here, go to icon color and switch that to display color, it will just be the same as the way it displays it in the viewport. What would be really nice is to have control over the toe that's linked to the rotation of this ankle goal, because that's really what you want to do. You want to be able to move this around, and I want to be able to angle the toe using the rotation of this IK goal. All the animation for the leg is pretty much controlled by this one null. And to do that, I'm going to click on my toe joint, and I'm going to go to tags, and I'm going to go to rigging tags and click on constraint. The constraint tag has lots of different options. It's a really powerful tag, and it's like basically the main tag when you're rigging. I mean, IK tag's pretty important, but it just controls IK, and there's lots more to rigging than IK. So I'm going to click on this. Nothing's set up yet, so it's not doing anything at the moment. And I'm going to click on PSR and go to PSR in here, and I'm going to drop the ankle joint goal into the target for the PSR. PSR stands for position, rotation, position, hold on a sec, what am I about? Position, scale and rotation. There you go. Oh yeah, actually, sorry, that's wrong. That's not right. We should put this on the ankle joint. The ankle joint target should be this, and we can get rid of P. The position of the ankle is already being controlled by this null. We just want the rotation as well. So now when we move this around, you can see the toe doesn't rotate automatically with the leg like it did before. It takes the rotation from the joint goal. Obviously, when you're rigging, you need to be rigging a character. It's no good just putting a load of joints in here, because when you hit render, there's nothing there. So we need to add some geometry for our character's leg. Later on, we're going to look at how to add joints to a complicated mesh. So if you have a complicated character mesh, which is what you normally have, like one mesh for the entire body or something like that, and being able to control that mesh with these joints is obviously the main goal of doing character rigging. But for this quick intro to IK, I'm just going to add a bit of really simple geometry, and I've got a very nice technique of how to add some simple geometry on top of this IK rig. So to do that, I'm going to create a spline to follow these joints. So let's click on our spline tool. I'm just going to really roughly draw over the joints that we already have, like this with a spline. Obviously we don't have any geometry yet, so we need to add in a sweep object and add the spline to the sweep object. And then we need to tell Cinema 4D what to put along that spline. So a sweep object will generate geometry along a spline, but we need to give it cross section, and that cross section I'm just going to make a circle. You might get something weird that looks like this, and that's probably because either these are the wrong way around. No, they're not the wrong way around. It's because the circle's in the wrong plane. So if you go to the circle and click on object, and then this plane drop down here, there we go, it should be XY. in my one. Your axes may differ. Great, and I'm gonna you can create curved splines for the leg. Like if you want a curved knee, then you can add some curved controllers, but I'm just gonna click on my spline and select all, and I'm gonna right click and do hard interpolation just to get rid of that little bezier that was curving around there. And I'm also going to add a cap so we get a round toe. So I'm gonna click on the sweep object, I'm gonna click on caps, just increase the size of this. If we switch to wireframe, yeah, that's better. So yeah, I can switch to a wireframe because isoproms was showing me a simplified view. And I'm just going to increase the segments there. Okay, let's check what we've got. So that's looking pretty good. That's basically all we need. So obviously it's still not attached to the joints, so that's the next thing we need to do. I'm going to quickly talk about Cinema 4D's dependency system. The way Cinema 4D processes information, like one thing's attached to the other, is going from top to the bottom in the object manager. And then there's other dependencies as well. So depending on what type of object you've got, it will process certain ones before other ones. So it does get quite complicated, but the main thing you need to know is that it processes things top down. If you think about what you're going to attach to what, for example, this sweep Nurbs, I want to be attached to these joints. So really the sweep Nurbs should go below the joints. I'm not sure it would make that much difference depending on how we're doing it. We could cause problems, like you'll get things that are getting out of sync with each other, or there'll be a delay on an object. That's probably because there's some kind of dependency problem. There's other ways of fixing it, which I won't go into right now, but the first thing you should always try is make sure that if one thing is attached to the other thing, the child should be below the parent. So the sweep Nurb's going to be attached to my joints, so it should be below the joints. I'm just going to name this R leg. And the way I'm going to attach the spline to the joints is I'm going to click on my spline object, I'm going to go to tags, I'm going to go to rigging tags, and I'm going to click on IK spline. IK spline has got another main use, which we're not going to go into, but it's very handy for attaching splines to nulls, which is essentially what we need to do at the moment. And the way we do that is we need to drop the spline into the spline box inside the spline IK tag. You need to give it an end. It's just expecting something in that box. We're not actually using this part of the functionality, but it needs that in there to work. And then we need to add handles. They're called handles. These are the attach points for the spline. And you need to add the same number of handles as there are points on your spline. So I'm going to click on add 4 times because we've got a hip, knee, ankle and toe. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm just going to reduce the depth. These depth things are kind of automatic Bezier handles. In fact, I think it just turns off if you click on your spline and go to linear. And then all we need to do is add in the connecting points into these object boxes. I'm not sure which direction these is, like 0 might be the toe or it might be the hip, I'm not sure, but let's just assume it's the hip. No, it's backwards. Oh yeah, I drew the toe first. So I just put in toe first, then ankle, and then hip. And we should, if you grab your ankle goal, we've got a working leg. Okay, well we've got one leg. The next thing we need to do is add another leg, because most characters have 2 legs. So let's add a null, and I'm going to call this R leg. I'm going to drop all this stuff into R leg, and I'm just going to duplicate it. I'll quickly go through and rename all this stuff L. And I'm just going to go into the coordinates of these to move them so that we know that they're symmetrical. I want to keep the middle of the legs at 0. So this will be, let's say, 75, and this will be minus 75. Perfect. Okay, right now what I want to do is just go through and rearrange everything. We've duplicated the leg null, so we've just got 2 separate legs. But really, in a rig, you want to be able to control both legs via the hips. So you want to move the hips up and down, and that will control both legs. And then you want to control each ankle independently. So we're going to have one master rig, which we'll call character, and everything will be inside that. And then inside that, next one down will be hip, which we want both of our leg IK rigs, so the left and right root. But then outside of that, we want the left ankle goal and the right ankle goal. And the reason being, you want to be able to move the hips up and down, but you don't want your ankles to move when you move your hips. You want the ankles to stay stationary. So basically, you want your left and right ankle goals inside the character null, but outside of the hips null. So right now, I'm just going through and renaming things and rearranging it. So try and match your layout to what I've got here. Basically, in this moment, I had to stop talking so that my brain could figure out the layout of this rig. So if I just pause the video now and match your layout to my layout, then everything should be good. It's also quite useful to make these poles. Something different other than a dot. I mean, you get this nice line telling you where it is, but I like to have a little pyramid or a little sphere on there. So I'm just going to make another one for that, and maybe make these blue or something, or maybe something different, maybe green. Okay, so the reason I've arranged it like this is so that these two can just go into a hip null. I'm going to need to move it, but essentially you can move these hip nulls up and down, and that controls the body, and we've still got control over the feet. So these two things work independently, which is the whole magic of IK. So I've just realised my hip null's in the wrong place, so let's just move these. And I'm going to change this as well, because the hip will be a key thing that we're going to be animating. So I'm just going to make sure this is in the right place. And I'm going to change this to a circle in the XZ orientation. And I'm going to change this to something visible as well, orange. Okay, now we're ready to drop these root nulls back in there. So these root nulls are the ones that contain all of the IK joints. So there we go. Now we've got both our legs, and it's all running nice and smoothly. And just for finishing it off, let's just put a little sphere. This is just for having something to represent the body. Maybe make it bigger. What should we do? You can change the size of these nulls just so they make them a useful size for whatever you're doing. Just going to save quickly because I realised I haven't saved this whole time, which is very bad practice. We can just do a quick pose on the character. As a quick side note, if you were going to make a character doing walk cycle, this is fine. I mean, you could do a perfectly nice walk cycle with this rig. I really like to have a toe in my walk cycle because otherwise the character's feet look really rigid. If you can add a toe bend just on this pose here, it looks so much better because you can really get that sense that the character's pushing off the ground. Oh yeah, sorry, one quick thing is that actually the poles should be under the hip so that when you walk forwards, if you're animating walking forwards or character moving around, the poles stay ahead of the knees. If you kept them here, I'll just show you what happens. You start moving the hip forward and eventually if I grab the feet as well, eventually the knees will just flip backwards because the poles aren't moving. So a good idea is to, let me just undo this. Good idea is to keep the poles parented to the hip. Amazing, so I think you can actually expand this rig. Like if you wanted to, it would be, you could make a full character. I've made full characters using this technique, not using any weighting. I've kind of moved away from that now. I find even though weighting is more fiddly, you just have so much more power when it comes to the shape of your characters. Obviously, you're kind of stuck with whatever you can do with sweep Nurbs and other spline related modelling. But yeah, I mean, you can make really fun, simple characters. And actually, probably the best thing for this rig is for animation practice because you've got this really simple look. It's not complicated. You know, the objects in the object manager are all nice and neat and tidy, and you're only really animating these three things. So if you wanted to practice walk cycles for the first time, this would be really good. It doesn't have any arms. You could add arms to make it more advanced once you've got the legs working really nicely. What I'll do to finish this off is I'll do a quick time lapse of myself animating a very quick walk cycle with these legs just to give you an idea of what it looks like when it's moving. I'm not going to actually explain all the things that I'm doing when I'm animating. I'm going to save that for a full animation class that is coming through the pipeline. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It'll probably be on Skillshare, and I'm sure I'll post some bonus content on my YouTube channel. But for now, please enjoy this time lapse of me doing a quick walk cycle. Like I mentioned at the start, there's now a couple of rigging classes up on Skillshare. There's one for the full character and there's one where I cover that character riding a bike. So go and check it out over there if you're interested in doing some more rigging. Hit subscribe if you want to see more Cinema 4D and After Effects tutorials. There's also a load of other animation stuff coming along the way too. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you next time.